They came in on a Tuesday. I know that sounds like a small detail, a calendar notation, the kind of thing you include in a log because the log requires it, not because it matters. But I have thought about it since, and I think it does matter, in the way that ordinary things matter when the extraordinary lands on top of them. It was a Tuesday. I had calibrated the northern induction array at first light. I had eaten breakfast. I had filed the morning atmospheric report, noted a pressure variance at the 12-kilometer mark, and logged it for review. And then the long-range passive array at Kelrath Summit Station caught 6 energy signatures descending through the upper atmosphere, and everything that followed happened on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. My name is Davin Koss. I have been station chief at Kelrath Summit for 19 years. The station sits at 8 kilometers above sea level on the northern polar highland, the highest permanent habitation on Earth's surface, built directly over the epicenter of what the old records call the Vethon Drain Event. The ice beneath us is not ordinary ice. It is old ice, deep ice, the kind that carries 580,000 years of atmospheric memory in its crystalline layers. And if you core it carefully, and we have, repeatedly, over the entire span of this station's operation, you can read the drain in it like a wound. There is a stratum down at the 4,200-meter mark, where the chemical signature changes. Oxygen thins, nitrogen spikes, a suite of trace elements drops to near zero across a band roughly 200 years wide. That is where they took everything. That is the mark of what the Vethon Harvest Sovereign left behind when they drained this world and departed, 580,000 years ago, certain they would never need to return because there would be nothing left to return to. They were wrong about that. I was the one standing at the console when they found out. The 6 vessels were running passive approach, no active transponders, no broadcast ID, no standard arrival protocol. That alone told me something. A vessel running silent in a surveyed system is either lost, hostile, or embarrassed. These were none of those things, not exactly. I pulled their energy signature off the array and ran it through the deep catalog, and the catalog returned a match in 30 seconds. Vethon Harvest Sovereign Survey Class. Yield Assessment Configuration. The catalog note beneath the match read, Last confirmed contact. Pre-drain era. Source, Ice Core Atmospheric Archive. Kelrath Summit Station. Year 1 of continuous monitoring operation. Year 1 of continuous monitoring. That was 580,000 years ago. I patched the contact through to planetary grid control and keyed the Kelrath Summit broadcast array. The frequency I used was not one I chose at random. It is the frequency the Vethon Harvest Sovereign used to operate their drain network, a specific harmonic in the sub-terahertz band that human engineers identified from the ice core chemical data roughly 470,000 years ago, reverse-engineered over the following 30,000 years of subterranean laboratory work, and then spent the remaining 140,000 years building into the foundation of everything we are. I used their frequency because it was the correct frequency, because they would recognize it, and because I wanted them to understand, immediately, before a single word was spoken, that we had not spent 580,000 years simply waiting. We had been learning. The reply came in 17 minutes. I logged the timestamp. The voice was translated through the station's Vethon protocol interpreter, a system we have maintained and updated for 200,000 years, longer than most species have existed. The translation was clean. The voice said, Kelrath Atmospheric Station, you are broadcasting on a restricted Harvest Sovereign operational frequency. Identify your authority and cease transmission. I did not cease transmission. I said, Kelrath Summit Station, Earth Station Chief Davin Koss. I'm broadcasting on this frequency because it is ours. It has been ours for approximately 470,000 years. I am transmitting our generation archive on this channel now. I recommend you review it before issuing further instructions. Then I opened the archive feed and let it run. The Kelrath Generation Archive is 470,000 years of continuous power output records. Every watt generated by human infrastructure since the first reverse-engineered Vethon induction coil came online in the Deep Shelter Network. Recorded, time-stamped, cataloged. It covers 26 settled systems. It documents a total energy output, cumulative across the entire span, that exceeds the Vethon Harvest Sovereign's projected yield from Earth by a factor the archive expresses as a ratio I will not recite here. Because the number is so large, it stops feeling like a number and starts feeling like a rebuke. We did not just survive their drain. We learned their technology better than they knew it. We went deeper. We found efficiencies in the extraction harmonics that the Vethan had never optimized, had never needed to optimize, because they were a civilization that took energy from worlds rather than built it from first principles. They came to a world and emptied it, and moved on. We were a civilization that had no world left to take energy from, only the memory of a weapon, and the long, cold underground time to understand it. And understanding is a different thing than using. Understanding goes further. The 6 survey vessels held position at 200 kilometers altitude for 4 hours and 22 minutes while they reviewed the archive. I drank 2 cups of coffee. I filed the afternoon atmospheric report. I noted that the pressure variance at the 12-kilometer mark had resolved itself. I logged that too. When the Harvest Sovereign spoke again, the voice was different. Higher in rank, the interpreter flagged it as Executive Authority Tier. It said, Kelrath Station. We are reviewing your generation records. We require confirmation of the 26th system's output data. The figures appear anomalous. I said, they're not anomalous. The 26th system came online 62,000 years ago. You're reading a mature grid. The figures are correct. A longer silence this time. 11 minutes. Then, we are transmitting a formal query regarding the status of our yield claim on this system. Registered under the Harvest Sovereign Extraction Charter, filed at the time of the original drain operation, 580,000 years ago. I had the response ready. We had drafted it 6,000 years ago, when the Deep Watch Network first flagged Vethon survey activity in the outer systems. Legal and Planetary Affairs had prepared it, revised it across 4 centuries of refinement, and filed it in the station's Standing Response Archive, under the notation, to be transmitted upon confirmed Harvest Sovereign contact. Do not editorialize. Transmit exactly. I transmitted it exactly. The response covered 12 points. The yield claim, under the Harvest Sovereign's own extraction charter, contained a clause. Clause 14, Subarticle 7, which the Vethon had inserted 800,000 years ago as a standard provision against resource claim disputes, stating that any system demonstrating active energy generation exceeding the original yield projection under indigenous technological development was automatically reclassified as a sovereign productive system and removed from harvest eligibility. The clause had been designed to protect Vethenon interests against competing factions poaching their claimed yields. It had never, in the 800,000 years since its insertion, been triggered by the world being claimed. Until now. We had exceeded the original yield projection by a factor that triggered Clause 14 at approximately year 80,000 of our recovery. We had been a sovereign productive system, under the Harvest Sovereign's own law, for 500,000 years. The yield claim had been legally null for 500,000 years. The formal renunciation document was attached to our response, pre-signed on our end, requiring only the Harvest Sovereign's counter-signature to close the record. The 6 vessels held position for another 2 hours. Then the Executive Authority voice returned one final time. It said, "We will countersign. We will file the renunciation with the Charter Authority. We ask one question before we depart. How long have you known?" I said, "We've known the clause existed since we found the charter in the archive data embedded in the drain field residue. We've known we triggered it since roughly year 80,000. We drafted the renunciation document 6,000 years ago and have been waiting for you to come back ever since." Another silence. Shorter this time. Then, acknowledged. Departing. The 6 vessels climbed back through the atmosphere over the course of 40 minutes. I watched them on the passive array. 6 clean signatures rising through the stratosphere, the mesosphere, the thermosphere, and then gone, folding out past the outer watch boundary, heading wherever the Vethon Harvest Sovereign go, when they leave a system that no longer belongs to them. I filed the contact report. I logged the renunciation confirmation. I sent the archive of the full exchange to Planetary Grid Control and to the 26 system administrations, as protocol required. Then I put on my cold weather kit, and walked outside onto the station's upper observation deck. The air at 8 kilometers is thin and cold, and it tastes of nothing much. But that morning it tasted, faintly, of the ozone that the induction arrays throw off when they are running at full output. A clean, sharp smell. The smell of power moving through the atmosphere on frequencies we learned from a weapon. Across the northern horizon, the sky had that particular clarity that comes when the grid is running clean. A slight luminescence at the atmospheric boundary. The faint shimmer of energy moving through organized systems. 26 worlds of it anchored here at the summit station where it all began. They had come to assess a yield. They had found a civilization. They had found the legal instrument of their own departure embedded in their own charter. They had found that we had been ready for them for 6,000 years, and ready in a deeper sense for 500,000. And in the deepest sense of all since the day their drain field went dark, and the first human survivors, huddled underground with dying equipment, started taking the field apart to understand what it was. That is what they found. I stood in the cold for a while, breathing air that hummed with our own power, and then I went back inside and calibrated the morning array, because it needed doing, and because that is the job, and because the job was here before the Vethon came, and it will be here long after they are gone. The log entry for Tuesday reads, Vethon Harvest Sovereign Contact, 6 Survey Class Vessels, Yield Claim filed and renounced under Extraction Charter Clause 14, Subarticle 7. No shots fired. Archive transmitted. Renunciation confirmed. Vessels departed 14:47 hours local. Grid nominal. Morning calibration complete. That is all it says. That is all it needs to say. 580,000 years of patience does not require annotation.